So an odd admission about the business of testing cars. You see, when you drive a new car day in and day out for scientific purposes, after a couple of years, you think you can predict the future. And sadly, not just limited to me, but many people you see that do this, we all kind of talk shop and realize sometimes we get our predictions very wrong. Like, for example, I never thought there would be a market for a $300,000 plus SUV that is also incredibly fast. Apparently I was so wrong, we need to drive an even more expensive one that, yes, is faster. Now, before you and I dive off into name, rank, and serial number of what exactly this is, a bit of market intelligence on the Lamborghini Urus. You see, ever since it came out, it has been an unequivocal success. Even today, as the market is catching up, at least supply is catching up, they can't build enough of them. So the opportunity presented itself to make one that's faster, more expensive. That's what this is, the Performante. And here, what exactly is the difference? Well, that spoiler in the back, that is to provide more downforce, because after all, it is an all-wheel drive vehicle, so there is a good amount of power, most of it going to the rear wheels in conditions like this. Then some of the construction changes, like for example, the hood on all of them are made of carbon fiber, but it ain't a GT3 that's at 3,200 pounds. Now, it's at this point in our story that one would scratch their head and say, is that enough to justify a completely separate model? Why wouldn't they just make those individual options on the standard Urus option list? Well, there's other things that change. One of them is not the engine. It is still the 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8 that has been very graciously donated by Porsche. Yes, they did wrestle a couple of more bits of power out of it, and that does impact the performance figures. And there's one of the bigger changes. The other one really wasn't slow to 60. This one is now 3 seconds to 60, VMAX 190 miles an hour. But really the big change is what's underneath the vehicle. And one very big red signal that's saying other Uruses have 3 off-road modes. This has 0 off-road modes. And here I have to say the honesty is incredibly refreshing, because exactly 0.001% of these has probably been taken off-road in the entire production run of these vehicles. Now, to back up this whole thing of this being a road vehicle, they're all fitted as standard with carbon ceramic rotors, 10 pistons in the front. So this, it's more of a Lamborghini than it is a Cayenne with some of these changes. Now, before we get behind the wheel, a favor. Could you hit the like button, share these episodes? You would be shocked what that does for the reach and in turn our ability to get more vehicles like these to share with you. So I love me the folks at Lamborghini, but they have this incredibly annoying habit of quoting the weights of their vehicles as dry, so we don't understand what they are in the real world with fluids. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, we use that 24 Cayenne GT that we drove just recently as a basis of comparison. That was 5,055 pounds, but this, it's a little bit longer, and the one we drove previously that wasn't the Performante was just over 5,300 pounds. So I'm guessing this one with the lightweight bits, maybe it's around 5,100 pounds, or depending on express weights and measures, around 2,300 kilos. With that, Corsa. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It really, in terms of delivery of power, I don't think this is the kind of vehicle that you're going to get behind the wheel and say, oh my God, there's a huge noticeable difference. The only way to really understand that is to have the two back to back on a racetrack and just cane the two of them together, and then you will understand the difference. And here in the Corsa mode, I do feel like I have control over the transmission. Is it as good as, say, like a PDK would be in like a 992? No. But shockingly, you really aren't denied downshifts, which makes this usable is one thing. I would argue it fits with the character, the personality of the Performante. Either way, this thing is like driving a baby buggy with your hair on fire. Okay, so up until this point, I've kind of sandbagged you as to what the real difference is between this and, if you could call it, a basic Urus, and that would be the suspension setup. The basic model is fitted with the air ride that we've seen on fancy Cayennes. This does not have air ride. This has a conventional steel spring setup. Yes, a more basic, rudimentary setup that has to be tuned. But that works in conjunction with a couple of things. Obviously, rearward steering, much like the Cayennes, as well as torque vectoring. I want to say Porsche torque vectoring, but I guess the tuning is different here. So putting all that together, the setup is drastically different than the basic Urus. It also changes the way the vehicle sits. So what you are looking at here is an Urus that sits lower. To be pedantic, 20 mils lower, much like Porsche does with all of their models, and the track is wider here as well. Again, to be pedantic, 16 mils wider. So put that together with all the other bits, and really what they're trying to do here is not so much extra power, it's to shave off a couple of pounds and make it sharper. Okay, now that you and I understand the real differences, driving dynamics. And here you would expect this to be a bit messy compared to that Cayenne GT, and shockingly, it isn't. Yeah, it's longer, that wheelbase, you don't really feel it. The reality here is that change in the suspension we discussed, it's otherworldly, it's drastic. That's what the Performante is about, not so much the extra, 7 or some odd horsepower we got here. It's not for everybody. The personality of this car drastically changes, like the ride quality around town. I'd go so far as to saying it's not good. It's probably the kind of thing where one would want to understand the differences between the two before saying I definitely need the Performante. But if one is using it as a performance car, meaning doing this kind of stuff, or even tracking it, which I would love to know how many people actually track a 5,000 pound, $300,000 truck, but I digress. The reality is, look at this, complete flat cornering. Okay, so let's you and I put aside all the technical bullshit. This is an absolute pisser to drive. A 5,000 pound vehicle should not be this fun to throw around, and that's exactly what you can do with it because there's confidence. Like there was a shift, like a Nissan GTR there. I know that's not perfect, not what Porsche drivers want, but me, I want to feel the shifts. I want to feel the imperfect nature of a coil suspension as opposed to air ride. I do want that active roll stabilization to kind of save my ass in situations so I can make this thing look like a rock star going around corners. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game around the options game with today's contestant, a sharper, faster, and yes, more expensive Lamborghini Urus. This, the Performante, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, for a base price of $260,676. Now the obvious question, how much was that green basic Urus that we drove? That one was a whopping $218,007. Now, you and I, if we went through all 22 options that are fitted to this car, we'd be here for hours. So let's pick out a couple of specific ones. Obviously, it's red. Believe it or not, we don't pay extra for that. However, we do have to pay extra for the black calipers, which for the life of me, I do not understand why we would pay extra for black calipers, maybe red or blue or yellow. Either way, $1,288. Then the multi-way front seats. Now, if one were familiar with the structure of the seats in, say, an Audi RS product, one would be very familiar with these seats, but not so much familiar with the $3,314 price tag that accompanies them. Then there is the option of having either a carbon fiber roof or, like this one, a panoramic roof. I personally would go this route. That is an additional $3,289. The sunroof is optional on a $260,000 car. Can we fix that? Then this one has a lot of carbon fiber trim on it. The first setup of carbon fiber trim is built in, $5,573. That's just for the exterior. Then let's say for the sake of discussion, one would want more carbon fiber trim on the inside of the car. That is an additional $5,702. Then let's say for the sake of discussion, we want ambient lighting on the inside of the car. That would be standard in, say, a Hyundai. That is an additional $3,194. Then we press on to very fancy floor mats, $703. Then the stereo system, at least the very fancy stereo system, which kind of kicks, is optional, and boy oh boy do you pay for it, $7,321. But thankfully Apple CarPlay is now fitted as standard in a Lamborghini, so grazie, vielen Dank, whatever you want to say there. Then we need to have a discussion with the US government. You see, you bought a very fast and very expensive SUV, so you need to be punished to the tune of $1,300 for a gas guzzler tax. However, very oddly, this one is subject to the gas guzzler tax because it's classified as a car to the US EPA, but the Cayenne GT that we just drove, same engine, same kind of power, no gas guzzler tax on that because it's considered an SUV, or so says the government. Then the only other thing we pay extra for is the destination and handling von Sant'Agata Bolognese for $3,995. Yes, that is significantly more than getting a Porsche over from Zuffenhausen, which brings us to a total retail price of $319,957. Okay, so let's you and I back down into street mode, there we are, Strada, and have a discussion about something that sets this as well as the Cayennes apart. You and I, we do the options game, we have a joke about how much the options are on cars like these. And the reality is, like on a Porsche, the average option build on any Porsche, whether it's like a 718 or a Cayenne GT, the average that people spend is $25,000 US. My guess is the option count here is much higher on a Lamborghini. But here's the point. These two are now, I would argue, the de facto like bespoke built cars. Put aside like Morgans and Rolls Royces. One can make this car look significantly different on the inside than any other Urus. For example, the Urus, we had the green one, which was a terrible color. That had the 4-place seating package, which to me makes the interior of this stand out over, say, the Cayenne. But then you look at this one, there's a lot more suede here. And here's where I'm going to say something that's probably unpopular. I prefer the interior of this over the Porsche. Porsche has gone with that Taycan-esque look where you don't have a hood anymore and it's a lot of screens. Here I've got a combination of, yes, screens, and it's the 2 screens set up like in the Audis, but more importantly, I do have some toggle switches here which are magnificent, and I have these switches up here. Granted, I'd like these to be toggle switches rather than actual haptic feedback buttons that look like toggle switches. But really, the point for Lamborghini here is this can be more customized than the Porsche. So yeah, we can do the leather on the steering column, on the headliner, all that kind of stuff in a Porsche, but here I can do more of it. Like we've got two-tone on the door panels, not just leather on the door panels. So this, you feel the Italianness, you feel like the Brioni suit on the inside as opposed to more like a Hickey Freeman suit. Okay, so what have you and I learned today? Well, first and foremost, never underestimate the appetite for all things that are Italian, exclusive, and expensive, even if it's not your cup of tea. And then number 2, this is far better than I expected. On paper, it doesn't really look like enough changes to justify a separate model, but in reality, I am blown away how sharp and how good this is, to the point where I asked the question, who is it for? Because I don't think this would be as palatable for the kind of folks that are buying Uruses today, because it is so much sharper. It is a real performance car, even though it doesn't look like one. Which brings us to the wish list. And there, can I make a suggestion? The folks in Italy, not just Volkswagen Group with Lamborghini, have gone to the EU and have gotten some special dispensation for gasoline-powered vehicles for a bit longer than the mandates. So may I suggest vehicles like this? How about we do performance-oriented plug-in hybrids, kind of like the S63e Performance, but in this wrapper from a different company before we go completely all electric, because at the end of the day, all electric doesn't work in all places for a very long time. We can debate that in the comments, or we could have a discussion in a completely separate episode, which we do. So I am just one man, and it's the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, may I suggest that you watch an episode I did with the Chief Technology Officer of Toyota. Yes, Toyota. Why do I say that? Because he was incredibly honest about how large OEMs, and I would consider this a large OEM because it's owned by the Volkswagen Group, how they deal with government mandates around the world. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.